Has it started? Hi. Today I'm going to have been having a chat with my old friend Joe Morrison. Do you want to introduce yourself, Joe?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe. I am a lecturer at Queen's University Belfast in philosophy, and me and Joe both got the same name, know each other from when we were PhD students in Sheffield. 2007, something like that.
Yeah, it was a long time back. So the students all know me as Joseph, but I
Oh, do
guess
they?
I
All
could
right.
be Joe as well.
Okay,
Um,
yeah. I
which is
never done a
a
Joseph.
funny normative thing about names and what we're known as. But
Yeah.
yeah, so today we're just going to have a chat about leisure activities. So me and Joe are both into some things in common, cycling and climbing, but also maybe have a chat about things like dance music and see where these things go. So
Perfect.
I'll just start by asking you kind of what kind of things do you like to do for your leisure? So when you're not working, when you're not trying to earn some wages, you've got some free time. If somebody said to you right now, you can go away and do whatever you want.
Wow. So, so this is hard for an interesting reason, right? And one of the reasons it's hard is because philosophy just doesn't really let you go. Maybe you have the same sensation. I don't know. Like, I carry it around like a backpack of guilt because anytime I'm not actively, like, teaching or writing lecture materials or whatever, I feel pretty hung up and guilty about all the things I should be doing for the other part of philosophy, which is, writing papers, reviewing papers, reading books. I haven't read anything in ages. So I'd like to say, like, if I could do anything right now, oh yeah, I would go and read some David Hume, right? But it's not true. No way. Yeah, no. If it were a sunny day out there, I'd definitely be out climbing if I could be. And then what's hard about that, of course, is you have to get someone else on board to hold the rope for you. So maybe go bouldering. So take a load of pads, go sit
What's
under a boulder.
in case any students don't know what bouldering is? How would you?
Low level rock climbing without any ropes. But you can take a crash pad. So if you do have a nasty fall, but you tend to do much more athletic moves than you might do if you're kind of on a rock climb, because you can push yourself a lot harder because it's just low level. So you do much more kind of dynamic or athletic moves.
I mean, you're talking about pushing yourself hard. This sounds
Yeah,
like work. I thought you said
yeah.
this was leisure
No,
activity.
totally. Well, that's it. In a sense, like I guess when I want to get out there and do something that doesn't feel like work, I want something that's gonna sort of tax me a little bit. I think the idea of kind of pushing yourself, taxing yourself, I'm not necessarily thinking about trying to achieve. So there's a mindset that some climbers and boulderers have, and maybe cyclists as well. Maybe I don't know if you do as a cyclist, which is a sort of internal competitiveness. Like, do you use Strava when you're cycling?
I've talked about this with the students a little
Right.
bit. So yeah, I am addicted to Strava.
Are
At
you?
the
Right.
moment, I'm trying to wean myself away from being addicted to Strava. But I
Right.
was recently comparing my annual mileage. I've got a graph of it against annual mileage last year, and every year
Yeah.
I have to beat the previous
So
Joseph.
so you're competing
Um,
against yourself.
yeah.
That's one thing. But do you compete against local? Like, would
I
you go
mean,
like,
I have had a few KOMs, King
oh
of
my
the
God?
Mountain. I'm quite
Right.
stupidly proud of that fact. Yes.
Well, so
Do you do that? You don't do that, you're saying.
I
You
don't
don't
know.
do,
So I do. I keep all the metrics, right? So I wear a watch or whatever, and I look at my heart rate afterwards, and I think, oh yeah, I'm pretty fit right now or whatever. But I don't do that thing where you go, oh look, you're on the leaderboard for this stretch of the high street. Do you know what I mean? I think that's the thing that happens with Strava, right?
yeah, it
You're going to do
is.
this commute run, and then it tells you afterwards someone else did that faster than you, and I don't do that. Uh,
I have punished myself quite hard to try and get in the top 10
I
of
mean,
things.
you're gonna run over like a pedestrian because you because you wanted to like get a king of the mountains or whatever. But see, this happens in bouldering as well, right? That even though there's loads to be said about it, but like you got like a guidebook which tells you like what little problems you can do on these different boulders that are dotted around the hillsides or whatever. And they're all
And
different grades. So
they're
they're
graded,
great.
right? Do you
They're
want to
graded.
explain what?
So usually like the hardest move that you have to do. So if you've got to like hold on to tiny little crimps, like little pebbles, and then you've got to get your feet sort of as high as your nipples are, and then you've got to like haul down on those pebbles until you can like jump for a bowl, like for a slopey ledge above. That might be like a 7B move, and you'll see people go along and they'll sit there on their pad and they'll chalk up their hands and they'll just do this one move and try 20 times, and then maybe on the 21st time they'll get it, and you'll hear them like shout, particularly if it's a man, because there's a kind of masculinity that's associated with this scene, right? That or there has been. I mean, it's nice that it's changing. They'll sort of go like, yes, yeah, the kind of chest beating kind of activity. I mean, and I haven't got that deep into it where I feel like I've got to get this tick, because they call it a tick because you go through the book and tick it off the list of boulders, like completed. And I've always found that a little bit, I mean, people use the word reductive. I don't know if that's the right use of the word, because it's not how we use it in philosophy, but it seems to reduce the activity to trying to tick off a list.
So that's not what because a lot of people might hear about something like bouldering and think, well, I can understand maybe you're just trying to beat some other people. So you're trying to have an achievement, and the achievement is ticking through these things. But you're saying that's not what it's, because I've watched a video, I remember once, the name's gone off my head, but actually I've watched it for quite a few, of people projecting a boulder problem for a year.
Yeah, precisely.
So not for a few days or not for a few hours, but people will project one single thing to get the highest possible, hardest moves for a year, working on one thing. And
no, that's right.
Maybe a lot of people outside the scene would just think the reason they're doing that must just be to show off, must just to be to say, so there's a thing, there's no Strava for climbing, but there is a UKC logbook that you can use. I don't know if you use that.
Yeah,
but,
there's also, there's 8B, the UK bouldering, the 8B website as well, or whatever that's called. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So do you use those? Is that not what it's about, even if you're not admitting it to yourself?
Right. So no. Okay. So I think the answer for me is definitely not, because I think it can be many things to many people, and I can totally see what you're describing is totally right. So that people will spend a year trying to get it. And there are some problems that are world famous, partly because they're really hard, or just because they're really good. So the whole of forest of Fontainebleau just outside Paris is dotted with these sandstone boulders, right? And there are problems there that people around the world know their names. Like so it's literally the case that there's, the side of a small boulder under a tree in Paris that has names that people around the world know about and Google and look up, right? Which just seems absurd when you think about it. But no, people make a pilgrimage to go around to get to to the forest in April, and when the conditions are just right, and try out La Mouche 7C or whatever else, right? And in a sense, I can feel that attraction. Like I can feel like, oh, I'd like to have a go on that. I know I wouldn't be able to do it, but I'd like to have a go on it just because it's famous. But I don't see it as like my project that I've got to do this. And actually, I think my mindset's quite different. So I don't know if you've ever seen the film. So there are bouldering films. Of course, there's culture all around every activity that we do, right? So there's this whole film industry that goes on around extreme sports, right? And there's this lovely film which is nothing like a lot of those normal films about bouldering and climbing. Like, I guess you know the one that famous cinema film about Alex Honnold.
We've talked about that in the module.
Oh, cool. Okay.
The name has just slipped my mind as well. Sorry. But I've shown them a clip of Honnold soloing. So this is like bouldering, except that it's up at heights that you will just die.
Yeah, kilometer high. But so those are like glossy, well-made films, like, and they're really, they're showing you this beautiful scene, and they're showing you this person and his like psychological battle with himself to make himself do impossible things, right? And in contrast, there's this scuzzy, homemade 7 lads with a camcorder film called West Coast Gimps, which has got I think like a couple of lads from Northern Ireland, a bunch of people from Sheffield. It was made in, I think, 2003, 2004. It's on Vimeo. It's worth checking out. West Coast Gimps. They just go to the States and they buy for like dirt cheap some beat up station wagon, and they just drive around famous bouldering places. Like at Yosemite, they get on Grease Lightning. They go to Bishop and they get on like some of the big Hueco tanks, the big boulders there. But they're punk completely in some respects. So they don't give a crap about like authority or whatever else. They're scuzzy. They're just like living out the back of their car, and they're sort of getting stoned in the car, like hotboxing, and then just climbing insanely hard, and laughing at each other as they fall off, and like pranking each other. I mean, it's a bit puerile, it's a bit dated, it's very blokey. But what's enjoyable about watching that, I'm a consumer of the films that go around the activities. It gives me I get more invested in those things as I get more invested in the sport. But when I watch like West Coast Games, I mean, I don't want to be them. I think of what they're doing as in some respects being pretty puerile, but I like that sense of enjoyment that you get when you get a bunch of people together, and you do something that you just have to laugh at because it's so hard or sort of so ridiculous when you walk in on yourself and you go, wait, what did I just do? I spent the morning scraping the skin off my hands to achieve some deep ache down all of my nose, but what a show for it when nothing except injuries. But I feel amazing, and like the people I was there with were all laughing at each other, and yeah.
So to kind of do a different reductivist take on this in the sense we were talking about. So before we were saying about whether we could just reduce it to being an achievement and ticking things off.
Yeah.
But couldn't another way of thinking about it, couldn't it just reduce it to a kind of chemical buzz? So basically you're doing some hard things, and that's stressing your body, which is making your brain release endorphins.
Yeah.
We'll just talk to some kind of scientists. They'll tell us how this chemistry works. And isn't that what it's all about? So it's not about achievement. It's just about this chemical buzz. And if it's just about chemical buzz, then what if I said to you, I've got a pill here. I can give you this pill.
Good.
And it'll give you the same chemical buzz, and so you don't need to go and do this climbing, which is a bit risky because you scrape your skin and you could hurt yourself.
Well, that's part.
But if it is just about feeling a bit happy and stuff, why not do it the easy way?
Good. Okay, so I think I totally recognize that. I think that's a good question. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks like if I had some leisure time right now, and you were offering me to take some pills, I would totally take them right now. but would I rather go and do this activity? Would I rather grab you? We put some pads in the back of the van and we go out to the peak and do bouldering. I think I'd rather do that. So yeah. So why is one different from the other? Well, so I think a big part of it for me at least is, and when I say for me, I think this is true for a lot of people. It is about the sociability. So it's about, if I could use a phrase, collective joy. So there's a type of joy. This is how I think about it. And obviously I'm a philosopher, so I think about it maybe a bit weirdly, but I do think about these things, and I think it's nice to think about these things. And I think climbers think about these things. They don't necessarily use our vocabulary, right? But collective joy would be a kind of joy that comes about not just from like doing it yourself, but doing it alongside other people. And so you're not just, should we say, experiencing your own endorphins. You're experiencing other people who are undergoing the same changes that you're undergoing at the same time. So it's almost as if you're responding to a shared pleasurable event rather than just experiencing your own pleasure. So think I guess that's the way I think about it quite a lot. And this is directly connected to some of the stuff I think about when I go like raving, when I go to clubs, right? When I listen to dance music. There's the sort of internal, put your headphones on and listen in your bedroom, or as you're walking, or as you're shopping, which is listening to dance music, which is not distinct from listening to any other sort of music. But then there's something about going to like some longer focusing at a band on a stage, but where instead you're in a club with a bunch of people immersed in the music, but not directed towards anything in particular. That the DJ is sort of irrelevant in some respects. I mean, they're doing something clever that's contributing to it, but you're all kind of just soaking up the music. But the changes that are coming over you and are being presented to you, some of which are challenges, you're all enduring at the same time collectively. And so it's not just that you've undergone some changes, is that the people around you have as well at the same time. And you did it at the same time. So you kind of have this sort of shared, I mean, the comparisons you might think of here are like the camel comes about from people who've been in battle together, right? And there's a lot of those analogies that maybe are worth being a bit critical about, but like once you've endured something together, you're kind of bonded a bit closer, something like that. And I'm sure that like cycling teams must get that. Like they all go out, and even when they're competing with each other, and you see those competitors getting towards the final sprint at the top of a summit at the, you know, Col de Tourmalet or whatever, and you got whatever Sagan and like his arch nemesis competing to each other, to having just cycled up, you know, 10 kilometers of 15% or whatever. They've got that final sprint and they're vibing on it. But afterwards, quite often, they absolutely want to acknowledge each other because they just endured the same horrendous pains, horrendous burning, and they pushed each other to hurt even more. And they're kind of, I think, even a little bit grateful to their competitor as they cross that line, because they're like, oh yeah, they really flogged me here. Like it really, like they didn't just let up. They actually kept the pressure all the way to the end. So that we all went through this crescendo together. Like we helped bring about this crescendo. And I think that's something that we do when we go climbing. We bring about, we exert pressure on each other. We egg each other on. Like, go on, Joe, have another go. Come on, one more time, one more go. Or like if someone is like, if you're rock climbing and they're halfway up the route and they've got their hands jammed and their leg starts going, the disco legs phenomena, which is like you're getting pumped, you're getting nervous, and everything's sort of like jiggling, and your muscles start to spasm in your legs, so you get disco leg. And the person at the bottom who's holding your rope just starts laughing a little bit and goes like, come on, you're gonna do this. But you're making it happen. You're bringing something about, which is dependent on another person, or it involves implicitly other people.
This collective experience kind of way of thinking about it's really interesting, because it might dissolve. So another way of making a kind of distinction is to say, look, we're going out and doing these climbing activities or the cycling to the top of a hill, and that's real and it's an achievement and you're doing something in the world. Whereas people who take drugs, for example, are doing something that's not real and it's just experiential in their head. And when we've talked with the students about the No6 experience machine, we might think, look, the one way of understanding it is real achievement is good and experiential stuff is false and bad if it's just experience. But what you've been describing is quite interesting insofar as when we think, say, for example, about the clubbing scene and how that involved people taking ecstasy, for example, that it's not a clear distinction between, oh, here's a false generated, people haven't had to work hard to get this buzz, and that's what makes it bad. We can think of that buzz not as just something people do solipsistic on their own, but as something that's kind of a collective shared thing.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I suppose that's particularly prevalent about MDMA, about ecstasy, is that people refer to it as an empathogen. So it increases the sense in which you feel connected to other people. You feel huge amounts of empathy with other people. I mean, that does make it seem sort of cheap, that you just take a pill. I mean, and ecstasy is fairly cheap, and the experience it gives is amazing, but also fairly cheap insofar as once everyone has kind of lit up on it, they feel that quick sense of connection, which disappears the next day or whatever. But
disappears
at the time,
when the lights come on.
yeah. But what it enables to have happen, right? What it creates a platform to occur, as it were. It puts up the conditions that enable people to overcome a bunch of inhibitions and now actually achieve something together. So I think, to go back to your point just there that you were trying to pull out from what I'd said, yeah, if you imagine that on a one sense, there's like a sort of objective tick list of like real objectives that we try and achieve, right? And that's real achievement. And then there's this other one, which is like fake achievement, which is just, you just feel like you've achieved something. And then there's this sort of middle view that I guess we're talking about here, which is like, you get to create what's going to count as an achievement, so long as you can find some other people around you that go, yeah, why don't we do that? Or like, let's go here now. So think about any time that you've been like with a bunch of friends and you, like if you're on a car journey and you create like one of those verbal games that people play, you know, on a car journey, like a long journey, like you just make an objective for people to try and pull off, right? A bit like when people say like, memorize this or do this tongue twister or we collectively we agree, here's our new objective. So like you can imagine a bunch of students in a dorm room, like in a halls of residence, saying like, okay, we're going to see who can, I don't know, climb out the window and go the furthest along before they climb back in the next window. Like you just create objectives. So it's not like the objectives are really out there, which is sometimes how it feels like with King of the Mountain jerseys or Boulder ticking off lists, because they're really there. Or becoming the best at X, or the world famous person for X or whatever. And it's not that it's just in your own head, it's that it takes other people to come up with and create whatever objectives they're going to be. And if you and me agree that it's an objective, then it is.
I mean, this all sounds really nice and creative and involving our agency, and like we're self-creating these things. But so I remember your talk, which I went to the other day, which was really great, about dance music. You brought in a quote, not to endorse it, but to discuss it, from Adorno, around, which was very scathing of people dancing the jitterbug, was it? And part of what he seemed to be scathing about, so I don't really know Adorno, but seemed to be that these people had given themselves over to desires that had been created by other people. They were being manipulated by a kind of culture music industry into like having these desires, which Adorno was dismissing as maybe not trivial or not worthwhile. And then thinking about things like Strava and things, I might think, oh, I chose to go on Strava, but obviously Strava company and probably has some, clever psychologists think about, oh, what's the best way to structure the app such that when I'm using it, it kind of triggers my desires and kind of forms and shapes my desires. Before you were talking about watching climbing media, and surely that's kind of shaping. So do these desires really come from you? When people go out clubbing, when we think about, I'm sure you might listen to some really kind of obscure, kind of crazy dance music with minimalist beats, but a lot of people just listen to pop music and their desires seem to be dancing to this. But isn't that just like they're being manipulated, and these desires aren't real kind of good desires? They are actually a reflection of these false needs that are created.
Cool. Okay. No, I like that. So I think it's hard, isn't it? Because we feel like we fall into this trap, right? Because sometimes we just want to do what we want to do, and then sometimes we walk in on ourselves and we go like, you're only doing that because you've been brainwashed, right? And advertising works. We know that. That's why it's a multi-billion-pound industry, right? It actually works. People are predictable, and if you make something sweet in the right way, they all go for it. We just know that. I mean, why is there a McDonald's, in every town, right, or whatever else, or why is there Costa like on every other street? These things work, right? So people are manipulable. I think we should agree about that. We should also agree that like you can change people's desires, and so people can come to really care a hell of a lot about things that you've made them care about. That certainly seems right. And I guess, we should be worried maybe a little bit about the way in which the world is going towards conspiracy theories and that sort of stuff right now, because it's actually really easy. And that's something that I guess as philosophers we should be worried about. But when I think about my own engagement with like the leisure activities, I mean, I agonize over this. I hate the fact that sometimes I feel like I just want to go climbing, or I just want to go outside or whatever. I just want to go and do some of these things.
I hate the fact that I feel like I really need to achieve that KOM and I can't get on my bicycle unless I'm wearing Lycra.
Yeah, good, right. Yeah. So like yesterday I wanted to, it's been raining here. Like it's not been possible for me to go out climbing. I was thinking, well, what do you do in the rain? Go out on a mountain bike, go get muddy. And then I was thinking like, oh, now I need to dig out my cleated shoes. I need to get my proper like mountain bike clothing on. Like it became almost like a burden, thinking, oh, I've got to get all the gear out and get, all this stuff. And of course, whatever, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, most of that gear didn't exist for mountain biking as we know it, right? There weren't, the bikes weren't anywhere near as advanced. I mean, I don't wear body armor, but I imagine some people strap on body armor, right? And imagine for some of those people, it adds to the experience. And for me, sometimes it does as well. Like, oh yeah, I'm wearing all the gear. There's this expression, all the gear but no idea. We use it a lot in climbing, quite a lot, because you can see someone turn up at the crag and they've got all shiny new equipment, and they're wearing logo t-shirts, and like all the stuff, which is all quite expensive, like when you first buy it, all these shiny carabiners and like brand new ropes that they're uncoiling, and they've got this sort of Instagram look to them, like they've got this bright colored rab down jacket or whatever, and then they climb and they're just shit at it. Sorry, they're just terrible. They're not very good. They've obviously only ever been climbing indoors. They've never really been out on rock before. They have a really terrible time when you go like, oh yeah, like they've bought the lifestyle, they've bought it quite literally, but they can't actually do that. Now it's quite easy to be quite critical of those people, and then also to be quite self-critical and a bit paranoid. Like, wait, am I just one of them? And I think, you know, that can actually feel quite oppressive, like that worry. Am I just one of those idiots as well, or whatever? And also, it's uncharitable. Everyone begins where they're going to begin. Some people are loaded and they just go out and buy all the gear, and that's how they get started. Other people start by just going up in their trainers until eventually they, you know, save up for a pair of rock shoes. So it's easy to kind of trick ourselves in thinking that one of these is the right way to do it and the other is the wrong way to do it. But it's also, yeah, I've noticed in myself wondering, am I setting myself up for a photo shoot here? Like, am I really going to do this for the? So this is about maybe about my lack of confidence, or this is about my psychology. But like, you know, you can be with someone and think maybe they're almost like doing this just for the selfies, just for the posing. Are they doing it for the? Are they doing it authentically? Do they really care about the climb, or do they just care about the way it looks to climb? And I've certainly been with climbers who care more about how it looks. They're more about the Instagram than they are about the thing.
Yeah, so I guess that's really interesting in terms of thinking about the idea of having a particular identity, where we mean identity not in the kind of philosophical sense of like being the one object that you
Yeah,
are that persists over time,
yeah,
but the sense of identity, which I think is a more commonly used sense of identity, which is having, you know, identity as a Spurs football fan, or identity as a rock climber, or it might be a particular type of rock climber, like a kind of uh, someone who climbs in the Peak District.
yeah,
So there's a whole thing in rock climbing around the difference between sport climbing and
yeah,
traditional climbing, and
totally.
which we call trad climbing. And
Yeah,
there's this kind of trad climbing aesthetic,
yeah,
which is quite different from a sport climbing aesthetic, which they tend to do a bit more on the continent, where you
yeah.
bolt holes in the wall, and it's seen as less authentic by some trad climbers
That's
who
right.
but I wonder about the sense in which all of these kind of activities, whether even if you're not the person who's commercially going and going to go outdoors and buying your kind of like getting your climbing gear without having all the gear and no idea, even if you are a kind of, you know, born and bred Joe Brown climber who is like built
Gritstone,
yourself up, has like some scuzzy things that were all ripped up,
hemp
isn't
rope.
that in itself also about creating a certain kind of identity, fitting in with projecting an image of yourself, even if you don't use Instagram,
Yeah.
but you just kind of aren't all of the things we do about kind of building up this kind of idea of ourselves and making ourselves into these certain type of people.
Yeah, so like that sounds like there's a thing there which they all have in common, which is no matter which way you went on some of these issues, like whether you purist about your climbing technique, or whether you're not, or more relaxed about it, whether you're kind of pluralist and say like, well, as long as they're having a good time, I don't really care, or whether you think, no, you should never use chalk when you climb, you know, that's just cheating, it's harming the rock, or whatever it is they say about chalk when you chalk up your hands. Some people think that it's inauthentic, right? And it's true that you could try and be like a total obsessive about some sort of authenticity there. So that would be like saying, uh, so a bit like someone who says like, I'm only going to ride a penny farthing because I don't think that there should be a chain on a bike. I think that the power from the legs should go directly into the wheel. The pedals are connected directly to the wheel. No chains. And you can imagine some kind of, well, I want to say hipster making a lifestyle out of that, right? I can picture a kind of penny farthing Instagram account, right, wearing tweed, right, and one of those.
I'm pretty sure that will actually exist.
Yeah. Those mustaches that are like twirled at the ends, right? You know those guys, right? Okay, and it's always men. It's always anyway. But but it looks like any decision you make in this area, it looks like you either try and find some sort of justification for why you make the decisions you make and the compromises you make. So, you know, why did you make that decision? And it looks like there's always going to be this scope for someone to come along and say the way you made that judgment wasn't authentic either, right? So here's a for instance, right? So I make a lot of bread. I've been doing it for years. I'm not a Johnny lately.
You're not one of these lockdown sourdough people.
Well, I am, but but I've been making sourdough for years, right? But so why do you make sourdough, Joe? And you know, I could try and tell a story about why, you know, how I got into it. Maybe I inherited the sourdough culture from my grandfather. So it's actually I'm just carrying out someone else's tradition and wishes, and it's just something I do, and I never really reflected on it until it became a big deal. But no, I chose it for like the same hipster reasons that anyone else chose sourdough, you know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I just thought, that looks interesting. I'm going to give that a go. And now it's gone through a kind of roller coaster of commentators on Twitter and on The Guardian going, oh, not another lifestyle sourdough brand. Here are people trying to, whatever, you know, invent themselves as if they're going to somehow do authentic earth food and they're all going to grow their own cultures. I mean, yeah, I make yogurt as well. Like, sure, I make a lot of food, and I make it in a way that I don't need to. I could just go to the supermarket and buy it. Totally understand that. Why do I do it? Is it because I have some sort of like authentic experience doing it? Probably not. Have I been sold a lifestyle that I'm now consuming? In some respects, but I note that it is a kind of free one, right? So I don't have to keep buying things to make sourdough. I don't have to keep buying things to make yogurt. I'm using less packaging. Same with climbing. I don't have to keep buying things because once you've got the gear, it's all free after that. Same with cycling, right? Once you've got the bike, it's all free after that. It's all just out there. Unlike some other leisure activities where you need to constantly be paying into it to be able to do it, right? So I think there's something that I have that's common across some of the activities I do, and the same goes for like clubbing and raving, except that you do pay for some of those things to go to them. Some of them are just free parties, right, in the woods or whatever, but some you pay to go to, and you pay for transport or clothes or whatever, but I guess you just think of those as running costs. The thing that you're going for is the experience, and the experience itself is somehow self-energized. But you're right that we can always ask this question about ourselves, which is like, did you get into this for the right reasons? Or if you're not asking that question, you could ask yourself the question, are you staying in this for the right reasons? So don't worry about how you got into it, but why are you now sticking around and persisting with it? Is it because of some authentic desire, or is it because it's been manufactured? And I just want to, in relation to that and that Adorno quote that I brought up in that talk about dance music, what I normally do is twin that quote with another one. So Adorno is critical of people who are just dancing mindlessly. He says they're just sort of robotic and they're flailing their limbs, and they seem to even enjoy the meaninglessness of it. And I kind of like that image, and it's one that I come back to quite a lot. I like the fact that this is not making any money for anyone. I like the fact that this is not making anything productive for anyone. I even like the fact that I might be harming myself in the process of doing it. Just sort of a bit like taking a bicycle and putting it on one of those cycle trainers, you know, like automated wheel things indoors, right? And just pedaling meaninglessly until like you've worn out the rubber on your rear tire. Just the sort of almost the waste of that feels like there's a certain way in which that almost feels a bit rebellious, right? So all of society around you is asking you to be a productive, constructive contributor to some ongoing project about, you know, being a good citizen and contributing to the general well-being, and you're going, nah mate, I'm just gonna wave my arms.
So that brings up a kind of different issue that I think is really interesting. So we might think, so we've been thinking a little bit about how we need to look at not necessarily what matters is the where exactly the desires came from, or the content of the authenticity of the activity, but actually the actual results that happens from the activity. And part of what you're talking about there is this So some activities are kind of do look like, so we have this general kind of societal norm of being a good, productive citizen.
Yeah.
And that looks like, even though leisure activity is activity outside working, you might think things like going to the gym fit quite neatly inside that. So
Yeah.
yourself a kind of, stronger, fitter, healthier, more productive, as the song goes,
Yeah.
is like is fitting in with that. But you were talking about doing things that seem in some way to be harmful to you, and I think this brings up. So,
Subversive.
going
Yeah,
to
totally.
talk about in the module this idea of dark leisure and
Cool. Okay.
leisure that kind of violates certain norms. And you were kind of suggesting that there might be something positive about leisure kind of taking us outside the general societal accepted norms. Why would that be good to do that, do you think?
Well, okay, so what I guess once people's like consciousness has been raised to the point where they realize that they're in a society that tries to use them or exploit them, that their labor is exploited, right? That's the kind of Marxist image. So that the surplus value that is generated by the individual isn't something they're able to hold on to, passed on to the people who own the means of production. So that's the Marxist image, right? And so if you see yourself in that system, I guess the image is that your surplus value is just going to someone else, it's been taken away, and that's the notion of exploitation, right? And I guess, I mean, I would hope that most people sooner or later would recognize that that happens, whether they think it's a bad thing. I mean, some people love capitalism. Haven't quite heard the argument why, but they love the idea that their surplus value is being exploited, right? But whatever. Some people think, I'm not totally into that. What they don't want to do, because they recognize that they are dependent on their jobs, they're dependent on the people who own the means of production. They don't want to wreck their jobs. So they don't want to put a spanner in the works that makes them unemployed. They don't want to tear down all of the capitalist structure because they just can't afford it, right? And so there's this, I mean, I'm not sure whether this is my vision for myself, but maybe in a sense it is. I mean, I think of myself as being into self-sabotage, but most people don't want to self-sabotage really brutally. So if they're going to go and like spray graffiti on something, they don't spray it like directly on their boss's office, right? They do it in an alleyway, right? Or whatever else. If most people, if they want to protest against the government, they don't go straight to the government. They make stickers and put them around, the city squares or whatever, but they don't actually go to the government, right? Because they don't want to be too visibly caught up in it or something. Anyway, putting that to one side, the idea that in my leisure time I might do something that is destructive in some sense or sabotaging in another sense, but also just that feels like it cuts against that flow, the flow that says you need to be productive, you need to generate, you need to be putting in society, you need to be respectable. So I think particularly in this country, in England, but I mean, I also see it in Northern Ireland, slightly different because the religious politics are different. But we refer to some of this as like a sort of Protestant work ethic, right? So this idea that somehow moral goodness is derived or relevantly connected to your contribution to society, that work and morality are sort of like you're a virtuous person, virtue in the moral sense, because you're putting something back into society. And I think for those of us who are maybe a little bit don't buy into that idea, are critical of it, because of the way it feeds into that notion of exploitation. It seems to make sense to me to go, okay, well, why don't I just do something that is pointless? Or why don't I do something that is the opposite, like destructive? Now, I'm not going to get a tattoo on my face because that's going to make it really hard for me to kind of get on in this society, because it sets the stakes so high. But getting a piercing, getting a tattoo, those are sort of small acts of rebellion, right? That say, or they used to be, maybe they're not so much anymore. They say, I'm not going to play by your rules all of the time. So if you think about the idea of like a punk aesthetic that just says, no, I do actually understand your rules. I do understand them. I'm not ignorant of them. Although there is that one type of punk that's intentionally ignorant and just says, you guys value knowledge so much, I'm going to be ignorant. And it feels like, to some people, it feels like, wow, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And I think to other people it says, no, this is a liberation strategy. I can't be commodified or co-opted by your value system if I don't even honor it, if I live outside it. So maybe not living so far outside the law that I can't get a job, maybe not living so far outside the law that I'm a pariah, I'm sort of like cast out. I don't subscribe to your values, so I'm going to find things that just look nothing like the way that you organize your society. They just don't resemble it. So what would examples that be? I mean, famously, maybe an example that mixes some of this stuff and has collapsed in some respects is Burning Man, where the stuff
Festival.
that happens, the festival that happens in the desert, right? So that was a bunch of like people who wanted to just go into the desert and have a big art event, and the whole point would be that it would be undocumented, it would be ephemeral. So much of our society is supposed to be productive, and this whole thing is supposed to just end in a burning. Everything that was brought to it just gets thrown away and gets burned and dissolves. So you come together, you have a kind of utopian city in the desert for a small amount of time. People take ridiculous amounts of drugs, and then you have a whole load of collective joy and hedonism. And then you put it all on the fire and you pick up after yourself and you leave no trace and you go. And what that kind of utopian, almost art vision of like a different counterculture, an alternative to society, has turned into is this massive like Silicon Valley venture capital, hugely, massively invested, financialized festival, which is massively documented and incredibly policed. It has now enough tradition in it and enough people who have expectations about how things are going to go down that it's become kind of rigid and orchestrated, and it's built on city blocks that you can't park here, you can't put your tent here, you need to have this, you can't turn up unless you're carrying these things. It's become rules and regulations, which in a sense maybe is the way that we have to go if we want to have a society at all. But the idea that somehow it's a kind of like radical alternative to society, it doesn't look so much anymore because it's started to reproduce some of the structures that we see in our society. But of course, people turn up with the baggage they turn up with, and one of the things they turn up with is their ideas about how to run a city or how to run a system or how to run a society, and they bring that with them, and of course it gets reproduced. But sorry, I'm rambling.
No. It's a really good ramble. It's an excellent ramble. I was just wondering to kind of maybe round it off, so get towards thinking about. So we're talking very much as if we've got. So you started to maybe move away from this a bit, but we've got work on one hand, and we've got this leisure, which is a separate thing, on the other hand, and we could have even leisure could be rebellious against work and take us out of this sphere of necessity altogether. But I wonder, thinking particularly about the climbing scene and the way in which, say, people do activities that are, for instance, when people create new routes, they might clean up a crag, so like a rock face. They might spend time making sure there's no loose rock there, setting some routes. So a route is a particular way up the route, the rock face that you'd write in a book. I know you know this, Joe. I'm just explaining it to the other people. And that might even develop for certain people into, so you get professional, you might get sponsored by a shoe manufacturer. You might write some guidebooks and sell them enough to make enough money to live.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder about these ways in which, how much, so we talked about the Burning Man Festival and how that's kind of co-opted, but is it possible sometimes for us, our leisure activities, to become work in a non-negative sense and become kind of productive activity that's productive towards a kind of utopia? So when people put up climbing routes, they don't then charge people to use these climbing routes.
Correct.
In fact, all this effort that people put in is then given away collectively free to, obviously guides are sold and stuff, but
Yeah.
so I've started rambling now. But yeah, my point is is it possible for certain kind of leisure activities, thinking particularly about this kind of climbing one and this culture of kind of uh, doing work that is just collectively given away for free to other people, to become, and then the kind of, I guess, last question is, to what extent, we started off at the beginning, you talking about feeling guilty as a philosopher that what you should want to do is read philosophy books. And of course, we do go off and do things like climbing and riding bicycles, but we also go to the pub and like get drunk and joke about necessary and sufficient conditions. Like if you're a proper philosophy
Yeah.
geek,
Yeah, totally.
we spend leisure time talking about these philosophical ideas. So I guess what I'm pushing towards is, can we really make this neat distinction between work and play? Are there times when the play pushes back into work? Could we even bring aspects? Is it possible to get jobs within a current system that we live in, capitalist system, that have these kind of values that we value in play in our work?
Good, nice. Okay, so I think what you're tapping into there is really a neat example of a thing that I think I struggle with quite a lot, right? So you're putting your finger on a thing that feels quite sensitive to me, like in an interesting kind of way. So let me give an example. So look, if someone spent a lot of time cleaning up a load of rock to be able to make a climbable route, what they would hope is that other people would come and climb it, because they would think to themselves, there's no point doing it. Maybe they would just do it for themselves, but they're kind of hoping not only to go down in history, like as the first ascensionist, which isn't that big a deal. Not that many people care. There are some routes that are just really obvious, because you get to the crag and you can just see this perfect line that goes up, like the Sloth, which is the Roaches in Staffordshire. So this is gritstone outcrop, and you can just see this huge bouldering roof that comes out, and there's a crack right through the middle, and someone's got to climb that. And the first ascensionist, Don Willens, 1954, just using his fists or whatever else. So you go down the history books, but only the people who care about the history books in those situations, there are very few of us. But what you really want is other people to climb the route. I guess that's what they're hoping for. So they're putting something, by showing that it can be done, they're putting something out there into the public consciousness that says, we can do this now. Like, let's do this, and let's use this now as our baseline, and maybe humanity can go further. So now we know that humans are kind of capable of that thing. Let's see what else we can do. So we're kind of exploring our humanity, which is a way of thinking about this. Now let's take that as another example. Are there other things that we can do that kind of put something into the human stock? Like when I put something out there that can help other people. And it's tempting to think, I think sometimes, that the only way that you can really make a difference to lots and lots of people is to either be on a world stage, so you've got to be famous, or you've got to be a big deal, or you've got to be a politician, and you've got to be changing like things that really make a difference to everyone's lives, or you've got to be like an inventor that makes something that changes everyone's lives, comes up with a drug that cures a thing for loads of people or whatever. That somehow these world historic things are quite a big deal. But I think more and more I've been thinking about how we do things in our social lives, our leisure lives, like you say, going to the pub with other philosophers and joking about philosophy or whatever else. Those things are making changes to, in a sense, what humanity in our small areas or whatever in our locale are capable of. This feels like a distraction, but I'm getting back around to it. Okay, so when I talk with other philosophers, like with you, when I talk with other people who are studying philosophy, like undergraduates and postgraduates and that kind of stuff, when we go to the pub, one of the things I always find myself wanting to get across is, like, we joke about this because, or we make these kind of in jokes, right? Because we actually need it to be okay that you're into this. Like, I want you to know that it's all right that you're into this. I know it feels nerdy, and sometimes we can feel a bit reserved about indulging our inner geek, but this is to say, this is a safe space. We're okay to be geeks, right? And I think, like, creating safe spaces in some respects is a real gift that we can do for each other, right? So here's an example. I went to Japan to do a speaking tour at a number of universities, and everywhere I went, I was asking the students there, the younger people that I was meeting with, as well as the professors or whatever, but the young people, I was asking them what they were working on. And there were several occasions where PhD students who were women said to me, you know, what's really surprising about this is no one ever asks me what I'm working on. No one ever asks you, oh, what's your PhD about? They always ask the men, but they only ever really talk to the lecturers. So the very fact that you've just asked me just now, like, what's your and I'm asking just because I'm interested, because I'm a nerd, right? So I'm like, tell me what you're working on. I just want to know. I'm interested. Oh, you're thinking about Plato? Cool. Which bit? Like whatever. You know, I love it. So I just do that because it's who I am. But for that person, it's like I've given them like a permission ticket that says you're allowed to be here. You're allowed to do this thing. It's not a competition. No one's angry. We're all into it together, right? And I think about those instances that we do for each other, which look like leisure. So there I am in the pub, there I am in it over coffee, asking you a sort of social question, like, you know, we're not being paid to do this. I'm just asking, like, how's it going? Tell me about this. But at the same time, it is somehow equipping you to be better at your job. Not you, but I mean that PhD student. It says you're allowed to be here. You know, don't feel like this isn't for you. You're welcome. And the more I think about that side of things, that's what I think I get out of climbing, right? That I like, it's the sociability, it's the permission giving, it's the mutual encouragement, it's okay to fail as well. So I backed off a route at Standage the other day. I got right to the top of it, 15 meters. It was sketchy as hell. I couldn't find any handholds, and I had to down climb. I was just like, I can't do this. It was a struggle. I was scared, and I backed off it. And having someone there who's with me who's went, God, yeah, that did look hard. Yeah, like chill, man. And like suddenly I felt all right. I didn't feel crestfallen. I didn't beat myself up. I was like, oh yeah, this is nice. Like it's good just being around other people and encouraging each other. One of the things, so here I'm getting round to it, I promise. One of the things that I think that we end up doing is we start realizing that maybe our work lives are just that as well, right? Although it feels like we're making something for the man, we're making a productive contribution to society, or we're supposed to be, or whatever, or we need to earn money to pay our rent or pay our bills or whatever. Given that we're only alive for a very short amount of time, this is a concern about mortality, right? But given we're only alive for a short amount of time, of the range of things that you might want to do with your limited human existence, some of that feels like, to me, you want to give people the permission to do the kind of things that need to be done and are worth doing, right? I don't mean that in substantial objective worth doing, but just like adding value to people's lives. And if that means, you know, like helping buses to run on time or serving people coffee or whatever else, then that in a sense, I'm really being unarticulate. I get there's a part of me that thinks the more you start thinking about how your leisure can be commodified, the more critical you can be about whether your desires are really your own. And the more you then look back at your work life, you might start evaluating your work differently as well. And so I think of myself now when I'm working as doing something that's actually really quite similar to what I'm doing in my leisure activity, which is I get to meet with students, I get to try and be encouraging, I get to meet with colleagues, I get to try and be encouraging. I occasionally have to spend some time by myself, which is punishing and I hate it. And I have to think about philosophy, which I struggle with because it's really hard. But then I get to kind of go back and meet with other people again, like, you know, Plato in the cave. Like you get to go back with the other philosophers and hang out with them a bit more. I don't know. I've been rambling. I feel like I haven't really answered your question.
No, I think it's great, and I think what we've kind of talked about is so one of the reasons I wanted to do this module is it seemed to me strange that so we have lots of modules, philosophy modules on, say, stuff like philosophy of war or philosophy of thinking about things like medicine or thinking about law, these kind of topics, and you might think, oh, that's all serious stuff, and that's why you need to do philosophy about it, because we need to do philosophy on the stuff that's serious and really matters. I think what's really come out strongly, particularly in the last bit of our conversation, is this idea that actually maybe recreation, your leisure time, really, really does matter. Yeah. And understanding the kind of meaning and value of these things actually. So it's often when we first start philosophy and we get first years coming along and they say, oh, I want to learn about the meaning of life. And it's very easy, particularly as an analytic philosopher, to kind of be dismissive of this and to say, ha ha ha, these fools, they think that philosophy is about the meaning of life, not about conceptual chopping or something. And actually, it's about this. But actually, I think when we think about leisure, maybe this has got a good chance of telling us not just about leisure, but also, as you're kind of bringing out, about how we can think about our lives and the people we are and the work we do, as well as the recreation we do, and
it makes you think
that in
about them all
terms of.
Yeah, like here's, so I think that's right. It makes you think about all parts of that completely differently, because you realize that maybe it's not so easily segmented, because being recharged as a human being by social contact makes you somehow a more useful, compassionate colleague or whatever else. Here's, so just to sort of almost like try and tie some of these threads together. Here's a reflection that I read about in an interview with DJ Sprinkles. So a DJ, that's their DJ name. That their other name is Ter Temlitz, and they're a kind of theorist, a critical theorist, but also a DJ. Released an amazing album called 120 Midtown Blues, which I highly recommend listening to. It has a track on it that's called House Music is Controllable Desire That You Can Own, which I think is an amazing title.
That is an amazing title.
Controllable desire that you can own. House music is controllable desire that you can own. But in this interview, the interviewer says to DJ Sprinkles, to Ter Temlitz, says, wow, you've played some amazing clubs, some magic nights in front of huge audiences. You know, that must feel amazing. And she replies something like, it's work. Don't forget that a DJ is working. This is our job. I take it very seriously. I have an obligation. I can't screw up. It's not fun and games. It's work, right? And then the interviewer sort of realizes, oh, this is quite serious, and asks like, oh, okay, so you think of this as work, so maybe you don't enjoy your job. And he says, in reply, says, no, we can enjoy these things. They're enjoyable. Of course they're enjoyable. I'm in a club full of people, but that's not to say that it's not work. There's not a transaction that's happening here. Of course there's a transaction that's happening. I'm being paid money to entertain some people who are able to afford to do this through whatever means, maybe as a luxury or maybe because they've got disposable income. But it is work and it is enjoyable. And the idea that somehow those two are completely separable, that you just sort of separate the two. A nightclub is a space of labor. There's bar staff, there's DJs, there's sound crew, and leisure, all the people who are having fun. But the idea that everything just divides it easily into one of those categories or the other, in real life, no, it's way more blurred. All of this informs every other part of it. The person who's DJing on a Friday night is possibly selling you clothes when you next go to, you know, H&M the next day, because everyone's doing everything. You know, we're all working and playing. So yeah, no, I'm totally with you that reflecting on what leisure is makes all of our lives harder all the time, right? It makes leisure harder and it makes work harder. It's just all difficult. Philosophy and overthinking things, right?
Well, I hope some of the students will get something more out of the module of this conversation than just overthinking. And hopefully overthinking can help us to understand what's going on, and also help us to do our assessments if we just want the instrumental gain of getting our degree. So
I just want to get a 2-2 and get out of here. Yeah.
Exactly. Thanks so much for talking to me.
It's been great.
And yeah, I'll put up, you mentioned a couple of I think a podcast and a DJ. I'll try and look back through the video and I'll find those links and I'll add them to this video. Right. Okay, so thanks for talking to me, Joe. Let's see if I can figure out how to stop the recording.
Cool.